We are facing an existential threat, and it's come about. I've puzzled over it. I think liberalism has gone out of control, and democracy has taken a back seat. We have ceased to be governed by those that we elect to represent us, and we've increasingly become governed by DEI is racist. It's not diversity, it's division. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. I couldn't give a damn about ethnicity of a fighter pilot. The only thing I care about is that he can fly his flipping plane. I mean, I think the whole thing's wretched. I think we should all integrate. There's been a move towards what I would call a more fundamentalist form of Islam.
Is it that they're coming in so fast now that they are able to just set up their own enclave?
It is North African Muslims in one silo, Shias in one silo, Sunnis in another silo, and you get a completely fractured society. The United States has done it, and Europe has done it. All of Western civilization is facing an existential threat.
Why does Britain and the West face an existential threat?
Okay, that's a very big question to kick off with. We might have led into it, but
yes.
I think it is the pertinent question, because actually I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe that Western civilization, obviously in my case, the United Kingdom, is facing an existential threat. But I think that we are facing an existential threat, and it's come about. I've puzzled over the answer to this. I've puzzled over it a long time, and I can't suggest that I've got a monopoly on the right answer, because it seems to beg a belief that our political masters would allow our country and Western civilization more generally to face the threats that it is facing. But I think the reason is broadly as follows. We have a liberal democracy, and we roll that off our tongues as if everyone understands what that means. And it's a virtuous thing. Liberalism stands for the protection and promotion of the individual, and democracy stands for the interests of the majority. But of course, the promotion of the individual and the promotion of the majority interest is in tension. In some ways, they're opposites, because what's good for the individual in many cases may not be good for the majority, and vice versa. And it's through liberalism, of course, that we've had so many great advancements, like the emancipation of women, promotion of women's rights, the bringing of women into the workplace, and so on and so forth. But I think liberalism has gone out of control, and democracy has taken a back seat. And liberalism out of control basically is the promotion of the individual and turning one's back on family, tribe, community, and country, which is what protects the majority. And of course, another consequence of championing the individual at the expense of the majority is that you lose a belief in nation state. You lose, if you're governing us, and I think many people who govern us are, by their own self-declared positions, liberals, you lose a belief that the United Kingdom's interests should be put first and foremost, and you start governing for what is the global betterment, because the global betterment will provide prosperity for everyone. That's how they see it, I think. That's me being generous about how they see the world. And in the pursuit of the betterment of the globe and liberalism on steroids, we have ceased to be governed by those that we elect to represent us, and we've increasingly become governed by international institutions where power has been vested and shouldn't have been vested by those who we elect, and by international treaties, and of course by domestic institutions as well that have been set up. Quangos is what I'm referring to, domestic institutions that are unaccountable to the people, because they are effectively little black boxes where political appointments take place, and you can't remove these people very easily. You can't hold them to account. And the kinds of people I'm thinking about, and some people watching this program might roll their eyes when I say it, but the Bank of England, for example, being unaccountable to the people, I think is slightly out of control at the moment. Ofcom, the OBR is about to be given legislative protection, the Office of Budget Responsibility, which will strip away from our government the ability to make fiscal policy without an unelected bunch of bureaucrats having to bless it before it can be enacted. And so through the promotion of liberalism, we have set aside democracy. And in setting aside democracy, what you do is you set aside the constitutional democratic unit that is the United Kingdom. If you set that aside, your history becomes unimportant. The contextual position that we hold in the world becomes unimportant. Immigrants are just as welcome as anyone else. British citizens have no greater right to prosperity than immigrants coming to this country. And you end up in a position where you've effectively given up on the very things, the cultural roots, the political, philosophical, cultural roots that gave us the freedoms, values, and prosperity that enabled us to put liberalism on steroids and then come and destroy us. And I think one really good example of how liberalism is out of control and sits in direct opposition to democracy, and where liberalism needs a really good yank backwards, is the regulatory and legal framework that supports diversity, equity, and inclusion, which on the face of it sounds all very lovely in kumbaya because you're progressively discriminating in favor of minorities who wouldn't otherwise perhaps have a seat at the table. But when you create a protected status for someone, when you progressively discriminate in their favor, you celebrate who they are, you are doing that at the expense of the majority. And what we've done in this country with DEI, for example, is say when immigrants come to this country, look, you don't have to integrate. We recognize your right to have your values, your culture, your religious beliefs. We're not even going to try to integrate you. We're going to celebrate your presence here. Whether you're North African Muslim or Pakistani ethnic Muslim, or whether you're Hindustani and Hindu, no matter where you are, no matter where you come from, no matter what your beliefs, we will protect those beliefs and we will promote and celebrate them. And through that, then comes obviously a breakdown in society, because society demands something close to an integrated culture, and as indeed does the nation state. And what we've created in the United Kingdom, and we all see it now, is multicultural silos of, and it's not even Muslims in one silo and Jews in another and Hindus in a third. It is North African Muslims in one silo, Shias in one silo, Sunnis in another silo, Wahhabi Muslims perhaps in one silo. Are you with me? And you get a completely fractured society. So that's what happens at the cultural base of society if you have liberalism on steroids and the protected status afforded to these minorities, which comes through liberalism. But the other thing that happens is you do huge economic damage, because when you progressively discriminate in favor of someone because of their skin color or their religious beliefs, you're not employing people, you're not promoting people because of their skill set, because they're the best at the job that they wish to do. So, for example, the other day, you may have seen, a few months ago now, the RAF was outed for seeking to only recruit fighter pilots from ethnic minorities. Now, I couldn't give a damn about the ethnicity of a fighter pilot. The only thing I care about is that he can fly his flipping plane better than any other fighter pilot in the world, because we want to be protected. And so when you allow this form of liberalism, globalization, the undermining of democracy to take place, what you create is an economic, constitutional, and cultural existential threat to the United Kingdom. And we are not alone in practicing these policies. The United States has done it in the same way, and Europe has done it. All of Western civilization is facing an existential threat.
Bloody hell, Ben.
Did that make sense?
Yes, that was incredibly succinct and impassioned. I think that was a wonderful explanation. It's just very a negative outlook, a negative world we're in right now. One thing, I mean, you grew up in Pakistan, right?
I was born in Pakistan.
Just born there.
Yeah. So I was born in Pakistan, moved to this country. So just very quickly on my background. My father's a Pakistani lapsed Muslim.
I see.
Drinks like a fish. Used to eat spare ribs when we were children and would forbid us from telling him that spare ribs were pork because he loved them so much. So he would eat spare ribs, and he's.
I know some kosher Jews like that.
Yeah, and my mum is Anglo-Saxon, white, Christian, born in Isleworth.
Right.
Her father fought in the Somme, so I'm half-half. But I was born in Karachi in 1965, which was immediate post-imperial subcontinent, if you like. Is that 17 years after partition, 17 years after the British left. And then I moved to the United Kingdom in 1979 when I was 13. Okay. And I would say my formative years, I have very fond memories and many, obviously, foundations that come from my early years. But my formative years were really at rugby school. And then mostly at rugby school, boarding school, and then Cambridge University.
That is a school called rugby, isn't it?
There is a school called rugby.
Non-Brits, they might think you were just really you're just a fantastic rugby player.
No, I was awful at rugby.
You don't quite have the stature.
No, I haven't got the stature.
I do have the stature, but I wasn't very good at rugby either. So I was just petrified the whole time, running away. I was faster and faster, so scared of being tackled.
I was petrified too.
It's a very scary thing, especially at 15, that everyone starts working out, and that's when it got really scary. All the rugby.
I mean, you should see them now. In your day, they probably were already very big.
But probably even more so now, I'd say.
In my day, they were still boys, actually. But I was petrified nevertheless.
It's a scary thing. Okay, and I want to know, because I keep hearing, so in Pakistan, we're always often hearing about quite horrific things that take place. Gang, can't use that R word too often on this channel, but happening to women and things like that.
Yeah.
But then I'm also told by a lot of Pakistani English people or British Pakistani people that those who come here are actually more extreme, which is something I've seen with lots of different sort of minorities, because they feel like they have to uphold values even more so because they're not in the holy place or the Mecca or the wherever it might be. What's your opinion on that?
So there are a number of things, I think, that have taken place in Pakistan and with people who've come from Pakistan over the last 30 or 40 years. The first thing to mention, just from a purely British perspective, is that immigrants who used to come to this country would have a huge hurdle over which to get in order to come to this country. They had to prove that they had something to offer the United Kingdom. And the kinds of Pakistani immigrants that you would have in the United Kingdom in the 1960s, 70s and 80s, on the whole, were really hardworking, loved the British system, had very close and fond memories of imperial India. And that is true. When I was growing up, all my peer group in Pakistan were very pro-British, very pro the West, aspired to British values and had a very keen understanding of British culture. And I would say they were great additions to the British fabric, if you like, those earlier immigrants. And I count myself partly amongst them, obviously. Aspirational, bought into our values, wanted to come and do great things, improve their lives, and improve the United Kingdom as they were here.
People are being imprisoned right now for private social media posts, and it's a matter of time before your private emails land you in trouble with the powers that be. It's time to de-Google your life with Proton Mail, the email service that actually respects your privacy and has a pretty sleek design. With end-to-end encryption and zero-access encryption, Proton Mail ensures that only you, and obviously the person that you're talking to, read your messages. Not even Proton can peek inside. But Proton doesn't stop there. You also get mail, Drive, Docs, VPN, and even a password manager. All privacy first, no data harvesting, no ads. Proton doesn't hold your decryption keys, so your emails stay safe from hackers and unwanted eyes. And with Tor access, you can protect your location and bypass censorship. Switching with Easy Switch is easy. Just a couple of clicks and you're free to take back your privacy. Join the fight against big tech and a spying government. Go private, go secure. Go Proton. De-Google your life today at proton.me/Andrew Gold.
Then a few things happened. As we moved, Islam was a much more liberal form of Islam when I was born. It was much more welcoming, and it was a broader church, I believe. Perhaps some philosophers and historians will contradict me, and maybe it's a function of having been a child. But I remember, for example, Andrew, that when I was a child, and you were leaving someone's home or saying goodbye to someone, you would say Khuda Hafiz. Now, Khuda Hafiz means, God see you safely, God bless you. And nowadays, you won't hear people largely, you won't hear people say Khuda Hafiz in Pakistan. What you will hear is them saying Allah Hafiz. And the reason they say Allah Hafiz is because Khuda, God, could be any God. He could be a Christian God, a Hindu God, or anyone. It's too generic. And so you have to say Allah Hafiz. And there's been a move, I think, right across the Middle East and Southern Asia, which is, I don't know I haven't got a clear idea of what motivated this. But there's been a move towards what I would call a more fundamentalist form of Islam, a more kind of Wahhabi Islam, if you know what I mean. That's I'm not an Islamic philosopher. I haven't even read the Quran. I've studied Islamiyat, which is the study of Islam as a child, but I haven't read the Quran. The Quran is a very difficult book to read, as I'm sure you're aware. I've had a number of tilts at it, but I simply get bored and put it down.
Yeah. Have you read Rushdie, sort of the counter?
I've read Rushdie.
And that's not easy to read.
Not easy to read, but some of his work, I read most of his work in the sort of late 80s, early 90s. To the extent that I read Rushdie, I read them then. And they were gripping. They're gripping books. Satanic Verses is a gripping book.
It's one of my favorites.
It's really interesting because one of the underlying themes of Satanic Verses, I'm moving away from Islam, but is that, one's inner character eventually comes to forge one's outer physicality. And I don't know if you remember, but the good people in the book, or a number of the good people in the book, start off as ugly.
That's right.
And some of the bad people in the book start off as beautiful. And as you go,
devil and angel, aren't they? Gabrielle, they're falling at the beginning of the book.
And then as you go through the book, the good people become good looking, and the bad people become ever increasingly ugly. And so, if you want evidence that Tony Blair is a very bad man, he has become progressively uglier as he's got older. And I think it's his inner corrupt self that is now physically manifesting itself. Sorry, the complete digression.
Sort of Dorian Gray kind of thing going
exactly.
on as well. Yeah, well, he's got older as well, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's got older.
Because you see all this stuff on Twitter, don't you? Like, look at Obama. I've seen the same thing used for Obama. And he said, well, he is older than he was.
Yeah. But, you can go, look, it's just a theory that it's a nice sort of mythical theory, but it's just interesting to me that he looks much more like Dracula now than he does the statesman that he did when he was prime minister.
One does when one's older, though, doesn't he? He was quite handsome as a prime minister.
He was. I'm sure he was very handsome. Yeah, I'm not that way disposed, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, you can appreciate a good piece of art without wanting to have sex with it.
That's true.
How many people are we now importing from Pakistan? And does it depend on sort of as you say, the different kinds of people from Pakistan?
Yeah. So I just want to say. So
go on.
I was born in the tailwinds of British imperial India, Pakistan, in a much more, I think, liberal form of Islam, which was, more embracing. And the first proper, I think, brush with democracy that Pakistan had was in the 1970s when Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was elected prime minister. And he did what so many leaders of so-called democracies in the Middle East and Near East did, which was to invoke Islam to get the masses to support him. Mm-hmm. So the first real move towards the Islamification, the real Islamification of Pakistan, didn't happen till the 1970s when it had a kind of form of democracy. And then the really interesting thing, a little anecdote which I'll tell you, is in 1982, I think, Zulfikar Ali, Ziaul Haq, does that mean the name? So he was president, he was a general, there was a coup. That's why I was sent away to boarding school. There was a coup in 1977, so I was sent away to boarding school in 79 because the schools were progressively closed. He had a referendum in Pakistan in 1982, I think. You can fact check me on that. And in the referendum, which was effectively an election for him, the motion was, do you vote for Islam? And if so, you have to vote for me. And it was the most blatant invocation of religion at a political level to see himself into office, having been a general taken power by coup. And of course, the majority going into a booth would vote for Islam. So they voted for General Ziaul Haq. And Pakistan has become, it has a struggle with Islam, like so many other Islamic countries. You've got a struggle between Shia Islams and Shia Muslims, Sunni Muslims, and, lots of little factions within all of that too. And, you often have people kicking off against each other because of the brand of Islam that they follow. But there's also a very broad spectrum of people, what I would regard as my peer group in Pakistan, who are very liberal, who don't think that way. But as we as a country, the United Kingdom now, have opened our borders to what I would call unbridled immigration, of course, we've taken in people who are not of that liberal nature, who are much more fundamentalist in their view. And then when you give those people the protected status that I described through diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you say, it's fine, you can hold those views, even though they're antipathetic and stand against the kind of benign Christian culture through which our democracy evolved and came forward, we're going to allow you to hold those views. And practicing as they do in these protected silos, they're prone, of course, to a form of extremism. And this is not extremism that's necessarily directed just at the white majority in the country. Or indeed, they're not alone in creating a bit of extremism. So you might have seen a year ago or so in Leicester, there was ethnic Indian Hindus kicking off against ethnic Pakistani Muslims over a cricket match in which England wasn't even playing. And, this is the kind of damage that we're doing to the country. And I know a lot of people on my side of the debate really only want to talk about extremist Islam because they feel that that's a safe thing to criticize because it's perfectly valid to criticize extremism.
Sure.
But I think it's more fundamental. It's literally more fundamental than that. What we've got to watch out for is fundamentalist Islam. An Islam that is unbending, an Islam which is not prepared to welcome the Christian culture through which the United Kingdom evolved. Because ultimately we are the liberalism that now allows the breakdown in the West is the liberalism that was born out of a patrician Christianity that recognized that it needs to step back and let the state do what it needs to do and for the democratic principle to hold true. And now that is being eaten up. And so I think we need to be slightly braver and we need to talk about some of the problems that fundamentalist Islam present to British culture.
Is that not, in a sense, a synonym for extreme Islam?
I think it's broader. I think because extremism is born out of fundamentalism, absolutely, because fundamentalism doesn't bend, but it's a stepping stone to extremism. And I think we need to recognize that just because someone's not an extremist doesn't make them compatible with our Christian culture. And my advocacy, coming to a solution, having pointed out loads of problems, is that we've got to do away with DEI. We've got to roll back immigration dramatically, and we've got to have a positive move towards integration. We've got to integrate we've got to have a society again. We've got to have a common culture, because without a common culture, we will both be economically, constitutionally, and culturally undermined.
I was telling you before about my own, situation with DEI, and it's extraordinary that in my family, I don't even know, but would have come into the UK in like 1901 or something, Jewish people, working class, and sort of try to work their way up and all of those kinds of things. And it must be weird for them to imagine, 90 years later, they'd have a great grandchild or whatever who would be told by the BBC that he has to step away so that somebody who's, first generation or second can take their place on the TV. I mean, my great grandparents wouldn't have had a chance to be a journalist on TV. They were just trying to make ends meet. That's what most first generation immigrants and second generation are doing. It's an extraordinary set of affairs that we've got. But are people just coming? Is it that they're coming in so fast now that they are able, and I've been saying this on the podcast, just like Brits maybe in Benidorm, to just set up their own enclave and
that's precisely. It's a function of the speed of immigration, and then this protected status that they're given. We don't have a vision of an integrated United Kingdom. We practice a regulatory and legislative required form of multiculturalism. Somehow, the diversity that they're seeking is basically what I would call divisions within society. It's not diversity; it's division. And we've got to get away from it. If I've got time, I can tell you just a little bit about a little anecdote I had in North London. I went to Hendon during the general election to do a hustings with the other political parties, and I talked about DEI, and I talked about how DEI presented a threat to the Jewish community. And a lot of people in the room disagreed with me because they saw DEI as protecting and promoting the Jewish community. And it puzzled me because it's so evident to me that it wasn't. And so I reflected on it. And I think the reason the Jewish community doesn't get the protection that it should do from the regulatory framework that is DEI is because when you put a protected blanket round a whole group of people, including Muslims, Hindus, LGBTQ, Jews, and so on.
Disabled,
whoever you wish to put into this grouping, they are naturally protected from the majority because they're given protected status from the majority. But of course, within that protected status of DEI, all these people who are lumped together under this protected status, they don't have protection from each other. Are you with me?
Yes.
So if you're a very dominant component of those who have given protected status, you are the entity, you are the culture, you are going to hold sway. You are going to become the dominant force within the grouping that is DEI. And because the Jewish community in the United Kingdom is a couple of 100,000 strong. And I think the last census for Muslims was 3.9 million, but I've read it's 4.9 million. I've got no evidence statistical, but anyway, 4 million, call it, 4.5 million.
It's a lot more than
It's Jews. A lot more. So the Jewish community is never going to be able to get the protection from DEI that it might feel it has or should have. Won't get it. So DEI doesn't actually work in the way that the regulatory framework hoped it would work. I mean, I think the whole thing's wretched. I think we should all integrate. We should all be part of the same big melting pot.
I would say, though, how that doesn't work necessarily for trans people. Like the trans thing is still huge, despite them, I imagine, making up even fewer than the Jews.
0.4% of the population.
Around the same.
Yeah, around the same.
Yeah, that's a funny sort of fact, isn't it? You're as an average English person is as likely to be trans as they are Jewish.
Yeah, that's right. Thing. On those numbers, yeah.
I would suggest that it's as much about the success that Jews have. I mean, Jews do have, and this is something that I think the comedian David Baddiel and I, what's the word we sort of bang heads about? Do we bang heads? That sounds maybe sexual, doesn't it? We don't bang. What's the expression? You sort of
knock your heads.
Knock heads.
Knock heads.
We knock. David and I knock heads. Yeah. We knock heads about because I think he's very fearful of any suggestion of that of even saying that Jews are more successful on average. But I think they are, as are Chinese immigrants, as are many Indian immigrants.
Most immigrants of the type that I was discussing are very successful.
Yeah,
because they had a huge hurdle over which they had to get in order to exit their countries and come here. So they had to be entrepreneurial, hardworking, bright, committed, educated, so they're successful people.
Well, it means that flies in the face of the DEI mantra, which is these people need our help because they are doing terribly and they're only doing badly because you're all racist. Well, that can't be true if there are Jews and Chinese people and Hindus and Black Africans from certain countries who do really well, but others from other countries who don't do well. It can't possibly be true. It must actually be about culture, which means the whole DEI hierarchy of oppression has to fall apart.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. And when I was growing up in this country, I had it drilled into me repeatedly at every institution I attended that we're all equal. We're all equal. There was no, this DEI thing. This is a new thing. And by the way, I find it incredibly patronizing. I don't know if you do, that someone telling me just because my dad's Pakistani, I somehow need a leg up. I don't need a leg up.
Yeah. I'll make it very well for yourself, haven't you?
Well, I'm very lucky. I'm very, very lucky. But I think, I'm very lucky. I'm privileged and lucky.
But you're hardworking.
And I'm hardworking. Yeah.
You're lucky that you're hardworking. You have the gene for working hard.
Yeah, and I'm lucky. I had a great education too, Andrew. I went to rugby, and that set me up for Cambridge and so on. So I don't want to say that, it's all on my own. But Dad, for what it's worth, since I'm talking about Dad, comes from an incredibly humble background. My grandfather was thrown out of the home at the age of 7 and had to literally mend bicycle punches to save his own skin at the age of 7. And he worked himself up from there to having a bicycle shop and then a motorbike shop, a car shop. My father was one of 8 children. My father was the only one of his 8 children who was educated. My father then got a PhD in 2 years and 2 months at King's College London, which was a record that hasn't been broken since.
Wow.
And, so I'm,
An extraordinary person.
Extraordinary person. Yeah.
Well, this is the thing, and I think there's an expectation among the woke or the progressives that when we look at DEI figures on TV screens, for example, if you look at the Diamond Diversity stats, which is what the TV channels use themselves, it shows that minorities are significantly overrepresented on TV. In some cases, and some channels and things, 2 or 2.5 times what you'd expect from the population. And that doesn't even take into account that a large number of minorities are first-generation immigrants. And your grandfather or my great-great-grandparents or your parents, they weren't expected to just land in this country with a vague understanding of English, or I don't know with your family, but mine wouldn't have even spoken English, and instantly be on TV screens as like the next Louis Theroux or something.
No, quite. Yeah. And I mean, my father never lived here. He lives now in England because he's 91 years old. He lives in my basement and he has a full-time nurse. He needs help. But my father, all his life, lived in Pakistan until the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, there you go. What percentage, and okay, we talk about Islam being a bit of an issue, what percentage of Muslims in the UK now harbour, for example, anti-Semitic views, are a threat to Jews or are a threat to women, and what you know what I mean, the illiberal views? What percentage would you say?
Well, the stats, was it the Henry Jackson? Did you see that report?
I think
that
also,
was done?
yeah, or maybe Peter.
I think it was like some extraordinary figure, like 30% of under 25s held a positive view on jihad and were antipathetic to the United Kingdom. I mean, it's a very high percentage. I don't want to misquote it. You'll have to fact check it.
I think it is about that, or 30% want Sharia law.
Yeah, I mean, it's really high. I mean, for example, Sharia law, it's like, what the hell? There should be no law in this country other than British law. And the argument, I think, goes, well, as long as Sharia law doesn't breach British law, what's the problem with tolerating it? Well, you can't have 2 judicial systems operating in one country, and you can't set the bar at which you allow a completely different system to operate just because it doesn't contradict your system of operation. The reason we have our system of operation is because we judge, our elected representatives whom we elect, judge it to be the right system.
Yeah.
We don't want any other system in this country.
Yeah. This is what we vote for.
This is what we vote for.
We see these issues, again, you see them in cults. I mean, Scientology, Jehovah's Witnesses, they have their own. The Jehovah's Witnesses have this 2-witness rule, which means that unless 2 people were there to witness often the abuse of children or whatever the crime might be, it didn't happen. And that's their law. And they will prevent other Jehovah's Witnesses from going outside of their circle to the police or to any of our authorities.
That's unacceptable.
Yeah, because they don't respect that. They don't respect our law. The Hasidic Jewish community has those exact problems. I mean, education,
so that's
schools.
Interesting. So that's a form of fundamentalism, which isn't consistent with British cultural setup, is it? It just simply doesn't compute.
No, but if we had 4 or 5 million Jehovah's Witnesses or 4 or 5 million Hasidic Jews in this country, I think we'd have a bit of a problem.
We'd have the same issues, absolutely. So when I talk about Islam, I've got no truck with Islam. I mean, if Muslims want their form of governance in the way that they wish it to be run in their countries, that's absolutely fine. But the United Kingdom is the United Kingdom, and it has a fantastic context for its modernity and its structures of governance and everything. And we don't want that context to be ripped apart. We want to protect it. We need to promote it. And Muslims, Hindus, Jews, anyone coming to this country must respect that. And they must accept that this is the kind of setup that we have in the United Kingdom. They have to accept it. If they don't like it, they can leave. Right.
How do we square this perhaps disdain of multiculturalism with remaining a liberal and tolerant racial or perhaps multiracial country? Because there's a lot of commentators, friends of ours or friends of mine, who I think, in my opinion, step into this ethno-nationalist kind of territory, which makes me deeply uncomfortable.
Yeah, so I'm definitely not an ethno-nationalist. As I said, Dad's Pakistani, Mum's English. For me, it's all about the cultural. Your values and the culture that you have, and I think if you're in the United Kingdom, you've got to accept British history. You've got to, in my view, we should be teaching our history extremely proudly. Winston Churchill should not be derided as a white supremacist. There should be no grounds for that. And we should put forward our national heroes with pride, and we should instill our young with pride in the country. And we should just drill home the message that we are all equal, that there is no substitute for being equal, that you do not get to equality through positive discrimination. Discrimination never gets you to equality. Discrimination just begets discrimination. And DEI isn't delivering for minorities. What DEI is doing is creating ethnic, religious silos, which are going to end up with multi-ethnic discord. And in order to control that discord, we'll have to do a bit more of what the French do, which is more draconian forms of policing, more producing of water cannons and, hosing people down. And I don't want that. I want a peaceful society. I want the kind of society, I know we've had our own ups and downs ourselves in this country, but I want a largely peaceable British form of governance with light touch policing, light touch criminal justice, because we all are pulling together. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I feel the same way.
Yeah.
Onto some controversy, because that's what we're here for. You once advocated, says Wikipedia, for leaving immigrants to drown when they try to cross the channel by boat. Is that right? Do you stand by that?
You need to watch have you seen the clip?
No.
So it was a as-if conversation with Julia Hartley-Brewer.
I see.
And Julia Hartley-Brewer, so my response to illegal migration across the channel, and indeed illegal migration generally, for any country, is that you've got to enforce your borders. Yeah. Borders are not a conceptual, they're not a concept that we just dream up and then ignore. They exist because they protect civil society in the United Kingdom. We do not want people crossing our borders because that is an invasion of the United Kingdom. It is people coming to our country without our invitation. So we must enforce borders. Border enforcement is inherently a physical thing. You don't do it through deportation. Deportation is what's required when border control has failed. It's not your go-to answer for border enforcement. It's what you do when you fail to enforce your borders. So that's my starting point. And the way you enforce your borders is to require the dinghies, at least in the case of the United Kingdom, because we're surrounded by water, is to require the dinghies that seek to enter our territorial waters to make the 12.5-mile journey back to France, which is a perfectly safe country. Please make your way back to France. And so what Julia Hartley-Brewer said to me was, well, what if when you intercept a boat and you say, go back to France, they stab their dinghy with a knife? And I should have had the presence of mind to ask where it was that they got this hypothetical knife from, and why were they armed in a dinghy if they were coming across for protection? I didn't have the presence of mind to say that, but I
even
said,
so, you're in a situation now, a moral quandary, where this person does have a knife in a hypothetical situation.
So I said, you give them a boat. You give them another boat.
They'll stab that.
And then she said, what if they stab that? I said, well, if they go on putting themselves in harm's way, you can't infantilize these people. They have to be left to the consequences of their own decisions. They made the decision to launch the boat. They made the decision to come to the edge of the territorial waters of the United Kingdom. And if they habitually stab rescue boats, I did go on to say, you could give them 5 boats, and eventually you can handcuff them, put them in a boat, and force them back to France.
Drive them back.
Yeah. But at some point in this hypothetical argument, instead of saying to Julia Hartley-Brewer, you're being preposterous because they're not going to go on stabbing boats, I think one brush with the very ice-cold waters of the North Sea would motivate them, I think, into the arms of a warm blanket and a boat that would take them safely back to France. But in a throwaway thing, I said, she said, well, would you let them drown if they keep stabbing their boats? And in a throwaway line, I said yes. But I shouldn't have. It was a gotcha moment, and I was stupid enough to fall into it. But just on that point, the Belgians have a sophisticated, dedicated force now that they've created to turn back boats that launch off their own shores. They use drones, barriers, fast-moving boats, dedicated team of people. And they've reduced the number of launches by 92%.
Wow.
So it works. And what we've got to do is develop the political will to enforce our borders. And France needs to do the same. One of the reasons, you haven't asked me this question, we're going to answer it anyway. One of the reasons we've got such rampant illegal migration across Europe is because no country is enforcing its borders, because we've got the Schengen zone. The minute you land in the Balkans, the minute you land in Italy, you can come all the way to Calais, and then it's just a little dinghy ride. Yeah. And Border Force are actually the border taxi service. They give you a warm blanket, they give you a cup of tea, a Kit Kat, bring you back to shore, put you in a four-star hotel. You get free meals, you get free healthcare, free dental care, you get cash in your back pocket, you get an iPad. What's there not to like?
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. It's an interesting thing as well, because I think most people who are, I mean, the average person, I don't think they're getting all too political. I know people are wising up. Yeah, wising up. Yeah, it's been a long day.
It's been a long day for me too.
They're wising up anyway to what's going on with regards to immigration. But I also think we forget that these people, as you point out, are coming from France. They're not coming from war-torn Syria, maybe originally. And I do wonder what possesses them to risk their lives to such an extent. What is so bad about France that they would come to it? Is there something I'm missing there?
Well, it's purely economically driven. In France, the average spend per illegal migrant is £5,000 per annum. And over here, the average spend is in excess of £50,000 per annum. In France, they have to live in camps. And if they're lucky, they'll get bread, water, and a bit of soap to wash themselves with. Over here, as you know, they get literally 4-star treatment. They get put in, I don't know if you saw that last week, in Altrincham, a hotel was taken over.
Yes.
A hotel right next door to a girls' school. And it's largely single young men about whom we know nothing going into that. Now, this is liberalism gone utterly mad. The protection of these people at the potential, I mean, God forbid it should happen, but at the potential expense of the safety of young girls in a school. And what happens, Andrew, what happens if one of those illegal migrants should hurt one of those girls, God forbid? Do you not think the people of Altrincham will be up in arms?
Well, this is the stabbing of that child. It was a similar. I mean, the stabber was from Wales, but went off to Southport.
Yeah, Southport. He killed 3 girls at the Taylor Swift dance. I mean, and so if something happens in Altrincham, is the Prime Minister then going to get up and brand everyone in Altrincham that took to the streets as far-right, racist, xenophobic thugs? If the state ceases to protect us are going to get pretty pissed off.
Is Douglas Murray the closest thing we have in the UK to Ben Shapiro in terms of sort of convincing minds and things?
So I don't know. I mean, I've seen obviously both of them debating and on the media, and I don't know whether there's a parallel between them. They are great warriors for their causes. Sometimes I think they could be slightly calmer, if I may say so. Douglas Murray, I think, is calmer. Ben Shapiro is very
scatterguns.
Yeah, it's like, I wouldn't want to be debating him because he would just nail me.
So fast, but they both would.
Yeah, they both would.
I think you'd be pretty good yourself, actually.
Well, I mean, I'm not I think I don't fire back at the speed at which they can fire. I need a bit of time to. I'm like a slightly slower machine.
They're almost inhuman, aren't they?
I mean, they're incredible. Their minds just work at such a pace, and they're just chucking out these.
Gosh.
But I'd like to. I mean, I try to the extent I can, and generally it fails to win over people I'm debating with. I'm not seeking to ridicule them and drag them through the mud and prove that I'm right and they're wrong. I want to try and make arguments that I hope that might find some fertile ground in their own minds. But it rarely works, because a lot of the things you and I are discussing come from so deep within ourselves that it's difficult to convince people otherwise.
I'd start tripping over my words as well. If I was debating one of those guys, I'd start to just go all over the place. The reason I ask actually is I wonder if, I know the UK now has GB News and I think Talk as well, Talk TV, which I don't believe is doing so well. I don't actually.
I think Talk Radio. They didn't do well as Talk TV. They're doing very well as Talk Radio.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay. But it feels like, I wonder if actually maybe a Daily Wire equivalent. I don't know. Do you know, are you familiar with the Daily Wire?
No, I'm not.
That's Ben Shapiro's network, and then networks of podcasters and YouTubers, as opposed to GB News GB News was a breath of fresh air in many respects, but it's also and it has a YouTube page which I think is doing well, but it's also sort of this TV channel which links it to the old world. And I wonder if like a Daily Wire here, led by a Douglas Murray or some sort of thing like that, would be really exciting.
I think it would be great. I think the more social media and media that we get out from our, what I call our side of the debate in a broader sense, and Douglas Murray is obviously, I think, my side of the debate, thank God. So if I go up against him, I think we'll be in violent agreement on most things. I think is great. But GB News fills a particular slot because it is beaming into the sitting rooms of people who are mostly watching Sky News and BBC, who would otherwise watch Sky News and BBC. So it's winning over a contingency that wouldn't perhaps necessarily be on social media and YouTubing and whatnot.
That's right. That's true. What about Tommy Robinson? What are your thoughts on him? Is it hard of him to convey the message, being maybe not educated in the same way as a Douglas Murray?
So Douglas Murray did a great little thing on Twitter. I don't know if you saw his thing. He said people like, he described himself, Douglas Murray was speaking, and he described himself as being able to make his points from time to time, and people would listen from time to time, and he'd win his debates from time to time. But someone like Tommy Robinson from a working class background is ignored by the media, everyone, because of the way he presents and, his working class accent and all that kind of thing. And I think it is very challenging for someone like Tommy Robinson. And Tommy Robinson has been prepared to tackle head on issues which would have most of us, slightly uncomfortable about, shall I say. And so at that level, I think it is very difficult and challenging for Tommy Robinson. I don't know Tommy Robinson. I'm not an apologist for Tommy Robinson. Neither am I going to throw Tommy Robinson under a bus. He did some great work on revealing the Rotherham grooming gangs and so on. And I think there's a propensity. Again, I'm going to describe it as our side of the debate. There's a propensity for people on our side of the debate, which is an ideology that isn't of the establishment, in the pursuit of sanitizing itself to being acceptable as broadly as possible. There's a tendency to throw some of our own under a bus.
Yes.
And I think it's something that we need to resist. We need to be very careful about when we decide someone's gone too far. And we shouldn't be quick to judge, and we should delve deeper. And I don't know Tommy, so I'm not going to say this or that about him. I've seen him say I've seen some of his videos and debates, and actually, I think he's got better and better with the years. He speaks very well. Have you met Tommy Robinson?
Yes, I flew out to Benidorm.
Oh, yes, of course. You told me.
Yes.
Yeah, what did you think? What did you make of it all?
Well, what an extraordinary place Benidorm is. It's sort of this British enclave out there. And he's just an interesting character. He's obviously got a lot of demons and things, and I think I think it's well documented. He's spoken about it, the drug issues he's had, I think. Well, yeah, he has actually. But I asked him about that, and he said, "What, have you never done drugs?" And I went, "Oh, well."
Yeah. I haven't either, actually.
I have.
Oh, you have? I haven't.
Yeah, I had. And I think he knew that, just at university and things,
Yeah.
But
I had a spliff in 1987.
Well, there you go. That's enough, isn't it?
Yeah, there's just one, yeah.
Didn't Obama say that or something? You could be the president now. But yeah, I think I tried to find, maybe in that kind of self-defense way, I tried to find, and in a journalistic endeavor, something bad he had said, because I thought if I'm going to interview him for 2 hours out in Spain, I need to at least go, hey, but you also said this.
Challenge him.
Yeah, it doesn't mean I'm judging him or moralizing, but just going, what would you say to those who say this? And it was very difficult to find anything racist he's ever said. There's one video I managed to find after I got home that it was sent to me, where he uses the shortened slur of Pakistani, but it also appears he has Pakistani friends, and he seems to have a lot of friends who are Sikh and Buddhist. He has an issue with Islam.
Yeah, and he's got lots of Muslim friends too, by the way, I think. That's what I've heard anyway.
That's what he says.
Yeah, it's what he says. So
I didn't see any of them in Benidorm.
Yeah, okay.
but I'm sure that's very possibly true. He doesn't seem to judge some humans as inferior to others on their immutable features.
Yeah.
That's what a racist would be.
And so let's just take that on their immutable features, judging people by their immutable features. DEI is judging people by their immutable features. DEI is racist. We have introduced racism a regulatory and legislative form of racism into the United Kingdom. And I'm so glad you said that, because I forgot to mention that when I give my long exposition.
It was great.
On liberal democracy. I should have said DEI is inherently racist. That's what it is. Let's call it for what it is. Even Martin Luther King said, you must not judge someone by the color of their skin. You must judge them by the content of their character. He would have been against DEI.
Absolutely right. I think that's a really good point as well. That side, I wonder if there is sort of a pendulum swing of sort of the left will be the sort of racist, bigoted ones for a period of time, and then that might again become the right, and vice versa.
Well, I know we get to a point where you ask me about my heretic, and I won't.
Don't spoil it.
I won't spoil it. But the left, in my view, are acting in a totalitarian, extremist, semi-fascist way at the moment. They're not prepared to tolerate diversity of thought. They're not prepared to debate. They want to shut it all down. We've seen that with Alison Pearson's. People have told me she wasn't arrested. I think when two policemen turn up on your doorstep and accuse you of having committed a non-crime hate incident, which incidentally is a crime, even though they describe it as a non-crime, that is effectively she was arrested. Yeah. And she was arrested for a tweet a year ago. And she's not the only one. There are 9-year-olds at school who are being challenged by the police over non-crime hate incidents.
Yeah.
And that is indoctrination. You go to school to say repulsive things and to say offensive things and to have them said back at you and to debate them. Yeah. And through that debate, settle your own view of life. But if you go into schools, the police go into schools and shut down debate, and that's coming from the left, that is totalitarianism. That is fascism. Isn't it? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I say to the left, they need to do some really serious introspection before they castigate everyone on what they call the right. I don't think it is left or right. I think it's uber-liberalism and globalism on one side, and it's people who believe in democracy and nation states on the other. And I'm on this side.
And the Uber, what was the first one? Uber-liberalism.
Uber-liberalism and globalism.
And it tends to be a bit more authoritarian.
I think it's incredibly authoritarian because it's anti-democratic, isn't it? It's governance through international institutions, domestic institutions, all of which are unaccountable.
Yeah. There's also this assumption, I mean, those 9-year-olds who were investigated, it was to do with saying someone smelled like a fish. And I believe that might be to do, maybe the victim of that might have been of a different race, and that's why it's a smelly kind of thing.
Children will call each other all sorts of things. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you were called all sorts of things as a child. Yeah. I was. It's part of growing up, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say, actually, because we're obsessed now with identity as somehow worse than other kinds of abuse. So after that, I think it was the Euros when we lost to Italy on penalties, the England football team, there was this obsession with the abuse that the black players received who missed a penalty, and it was all about the black players, this and that. But then the Alan Turing Institute ran some sort of study. They looked at Twitter at that time and found that the person that was abused more than anyone else in the England team was Harry Kane, about 4 or 5 times more than anybody else.
How
absolutely abused beyond belief. Yeah. And it was there were 2 or 3 more white players before the first black player was there in terms of the number of abusive messages or posts they'd received. The difference was obviously the Harry Kane ones weren't about identity or race as such. They made fun of his speech, but he's got a slight speech impediment, things like that. But I would say, well, that's just as hurtful. I've been called all names under the sun to do with being Jewish. I don't think that they are objectively or innately worse than when people make fun of my height or my this or that. I mean, just being abused anyway is quite horrible. Do you feel the same way? You must have heard slurs about Pakistani over the years, but other slurs.
I mean, as I mentioned, every institution I attended in this country and worked for has been absolutely not racist, has driven home the principle of equality. But of course, children call each other things all the time. And if they can home in on a particular characteristic that they can get a little hook in to, knock you with, they'll do it. So I was called the abbreviated version of Pakistani when I first came here. And so what?
Did it hurt more that you must have been called other things?
I was called all sorts of things.
Just looking at you, I can tell there must be a whole number. No, I joke, but that's it. The stuff that people said, oh, you're Jewish, this and that, I just ignore. It's just a bunch of lunatics. Whereas when they say things like, I was watching your show the other day and you're not a very good presenter, that actually hurts. There's no reason that this identity-related stuff is innately worse than anything else. Yeah. We've started worshipping identity at the moment. That's the issue.
I tell you what's really interesting. Again, a digression. Stop me if it's not worth listening to.
But too polite to do so, but go on.
I went to Oxford Union to have a debate on Islam. And before the debate on Islam, there was about over an hour of house business that the Oxford Union does. Have you ever debated there?
No.
So they do house business before the debaters get to speak. And actually, it was extraordinarily late by the time I got up to speak, so I was quite tired and really quite irritated by the whole thing, particularly the house business. The entire house business, as far as I could see, turned on various members of the union, accusing other members of the union of having offended them on the lines of race. It was all on the lines of race. So there's an Egyptian guy who was accused by a black guy. There was a Muslim guy who was accusing the black guy. There's a Chinese guy who was accusing the Egyptian guy. And it went on and on and on. And I thought, this is the bastion of free speech. This is the Oxford Union, an institution I had held in huge, even though I went to Cambridge, I held the Oxford Union as a sort of more superior debating chamber than the Cambridge Union. And this is the quality of their debate. And I was absolutely stunned. Oxford University, if Oxford Union is symptomatic of the political discourse at Oxford University, Oxford University has fallen.
It's really worrying. I went to Leeds University, and there are now professors under investigation just for speaking out against some of the Palestine marches and things like that. I mean, it's just the universities are gone.
Yeah,
they're gone,
and it's disastrous. And the only hope we have is that Trump stays true to his word, that he debugs the bureaucracy and the long march of the institutions that obviously the United States has suffered with, and that we take our lead from it, and somehow the Western world saves itself. But the education establishments is where it is most rife, and it is the education establishments that are turning out the next generation of British citizens, and so I think it is deeply worrying.
I've got one more question for you, but first, where can people find you?
What, in terms of social media and stuff?
Yeah, not to come and beat you up.
Yeah. Well, I don't know where they can find. I'm on Facebook. I think I'm on Instagram.
Not on X?
I'm on Twitter. Yeah, I'm on X. X is where I do most of it, at BenHabib6.
Okay.
That's where I do most of my stuff. There's also there's another X account that I've got from my campaigning days, which also puts out stuff.
Okay.
And I think I'm also on TikTok. But it's Floss Knight, who is my campaign manager. She does all of that. I do the speaking, and then she very adeptly, with a bit of support, gets it out onto all these platforms.
Okay, so blame Floss Knight.
Yeah.
Who's a heretic you admire?
So the heretic I admire, and I was challenged when I was told I had to have a heretic, but it became very clear to me. It was a hero of mine when I was a child. Is Socrates. The heretic is Socrates, and I think he's particularly pertinent for today's interview, because Socrates was put to death effectively because of free speech. And he was accused of insulting the Greek pantheon and of poisoning the minds of the youth in Athens. And there's a brilliant, the three little brilliant books, Apology, Crito, and Phaedo. Apology is the trial of Socrates. Crito is the story of his followers trying to convince him not to allow them to put him to death, but to escape. And then Phaedo is the actual death of Socrates. And what's remarkable about the story is effectively the issues that they were grappling with, free speech. Socrates was pro-free speech. The issue that we're now having to fight, the introduction through the back door of blasphemy laws. By the way, I think the non-crime hate incident legislation is effectively the beginning of blasphemy laws being introduced in the United Kingdom. He had to fight that. He had to fight for the right of free speech, and he did it so brilliantly in the Apology. It's so clear from the Apology, that the book, The Apology, that he won the debate in court, but he was put to death. And even though he could have escaped, and this is the mark of the man, even though he could have escaped with the help of his colleagues, he chose to stay in Athens, which was his country. He understood the importance of the nation state, in which I so firmly believe. He stayed in Athens, and he allowed the state of Athens to put him to death. And so I think he is a man of remarkable intellectual stature, remarkable moral correctitude, and terrific fortitude, because he was prepared to face his death even though he could have escaped it.
It's a beautiful heretic. I like that. People, please go follow Ben Habib on the links below. We'll put the links there. Hit that like button. Keep watching this channel.
Join the fight against big tech and a spying government. Go private, go secure, and go Proton. De-Google your life today at proton.me/Andrew Gold.